Hey, Next Levelers, it's Bob Gibbons. Thanks for joining us today for another episode of the Next Level Show. We're here to learn what works and what doesn't work when you start a company and you grow it, and today's guest is no exception. He's a longtime entrepreneur. Jeff Harkinson is our guest, and he's the founder of Harkinson Investment Corporation, and truth be told, founder of probably dozens and dozens of other entities that we'll get to that in a minute. But he has been involved in the commercial real estate business for many, many, many years, and is one of the guys that I've actually taken clients to. So, I represent companies that lease space in office buildings and warehouses, and Jeff's company owns those. He buys them and, sometimes redevelops them, et cetera. So we'll get into all that in a minute. But Jeff, welcome to the show. Glad you're with us.
Well, thank you, Bob. I appreciate the invitation to be here.
Well, you may not say that when we're all done.
Well, I'm sure I will. We'll wait and see.
We'll wait and see. Never rush to judgment, right? Well,
Correct.
Thanks for being on the show. We're excited to have you. So you have built an empire of real estate in Dallas, Texas.
Well, there's those who have much larger and probably more extensive empires, but let's call it a mini accumulation.
And a mini accumulate. Okay. I can go with that. So tell our listeners, sort of just in a nutshell, what is your business?
Well, what we do is we try to source income properties primarily for acquisition. And so we search the market to see if there's an opportunity that we think is properly valued or hopefully undervalued that we can acquire and add value. And to do that, we rely on private equity capital and we rely on the credit debt markets to structure deals that give an investor a dependable monthly cash flow.
So you're more focused on cash flow than you are on turning something around and flipping it real quick and making a giant.
Well, we look to add value. We definitely want to grow the value of the asset over time. But for the first years of our investments, we tried to take a buy and hold strategy. But we also want to be mindful that sometimes a property can max out in its value and have more downside risk than further upside potential.
Mm-hmm.
And in that case, we may actually go and sell the property.
Okay. And you don't always know that from day one, or do you always know that before you even close on it?
We've now come to the point where we've divided properties into two categories. Add value, maybe a 3 to 7 year hold, and then turn the property. And then what we call core assets, properties that we think are fortunately located and positioned to be good today, and they're likely to be good 20 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
And because now I have 3 children, and one of whom is in the business with me, and her husband's in the business with me as well, I'm taking a multi-generational approach to evaluation of our assets.
Gotcha. And I want to get into that later, but we'll set that aside for later in the show. So so you have the value-added portfolio and the core portfolio, one you're planning to sell at some point, the other one you plan to hold on to for a while. What's the shortest amount of time you've ever owned any property before you sold it?
That's an interesting question, Bob, and it comes to mind that I bought one of my early properties I bought was a little garden office building over on Loop 820 in Hurst, Texas.
Okay.
And it was next to some multi-story gold glass towers, kind of like Campbell Center here on Central Expressway.
I know those towers. They're not as good looking as Campbell Center, as
No,
I recall.
definitely not. The only thing in common is they use gold glass.
Exactly.
But there were a couple of guys that owned that building, and one of my partners at the time was a lawyer with Johnson and Swanson. He was an international tax attorney, and he'd rather be in real estate than practice law, so he partnered with me, and we bought these one-story buildings from this partnership. Well, we get a call about 6 months later from one of the partners, and he said, we sold those buildings, but I can't find anything I like better. Would you sell the building back to me?
Oh my, 6 months.
6 months. And I said, well, we bought this, as a longer term hold, but for the right price, we'll sell it back to you. So I think we sold it back to him and made a 20% profit in 6 months. And what we figured out is that he wanted to divorce his partner in the building. He didn't like his partner. So we talked the partner into selling the building, and then he came and bought it back, and that's the way he got rid of his partner.
Oh, my goodness. That's an expensive way to get rid of a partner.
Exactly.
I mean, you would have thought he would have been able to get rid of his partner with less money than that.
Exactly.
That's interesting. And so had you made any significant changes to the building in that period of time?
Nothing. Literally nothing. It was like
goodness.
exactly as he sold it to us, because we didn't have time to implement any planned improvements.
That's incredible. And what's the longest you've held a property?
Well, I guess we have a couple of properties that we still have that we bought in 1992. One is a 60,000-foot office flex property over in the DFW Freeport Business Park in Irving. And the other is where my office is. Well, actually, we bought that in 94. That's also a long-term core holding. But the other asset is a 100,000 square foot shopping center at the corner of Parker and Custer in Plano. Mm-hmm. We bought that property actually on a flip, if you know that term.
Yep.
A couple of gentlemen had contracted to buy that from the FDIC. It was a foreclosure. And we bought their contract for $300,000, and our total cost on 118,000 square foot shopping center was $2 million in 1992.
You were able to buy the thing with $2 million in cash, or that was what the whole thing cost you?
That was what the whole thing cost, and I think we came up with maybe $500,000 of equity.
That's unbelievable.
And we still own that today, and that's what we're calling a core holding, because Parker and Custer now have about 40,000 cars a day on that intersection each way.
And and I think 40% or most of those people going through that intersection are going to the DMV, which is one of your tenants, isn't it?
Exactly.
They line up there. Oh my gosh, I hate to think about having to go there.
So we are we're planning on a upgrade to that center within the next 3 years. We had a tenant there, a doctor out of Houston, who had bought the leasehold estate on a former Safeway store. So he controlled 35,000 square feet of the 100,000 square feet. And my goal in life was to outlive the doctor, because in September of this year, his leasehold expires. He has no further options, and he's only paying us $3.81 a square foot gross, meaning including expenses. And so just getting that back from him, he subleased a Dollar Tree and a Salon Suites and tanning salon and T-Mobile and other tenants, and he's making the spread. Well, all that spread that he's been making for the last 30 years, we're suddenly going to get ourselves.
Oh my goodness, what a day that's going to be.
That'll be a nice little upside.
Yeah, I drive by that all the time. You know, I live in that area, in Plano, just north of there. So I used to office in the Custer Office Park right behind there.
Oh, sure.
So yeah, I've been there many times. In fact, I almost put a tenant in your building there at one time. We worked long and hard on that, and unfortunately, they did not choose that building. We were down to one of two, and you were one of two. But
we still have it. There's still another chance for us to do a deal.
Well, except that they're not going to stay in business, so I guess not. Oh, interesting. So let's kind of back up a little bit. When you got into, first of all, what did you go to school to do? What was your degree in?
Well, my passion in school, I went to Austin College in Sherman, Texas.
Yep.
And I was economics major and political science major. And I was president of the Pre-Law Society. I was going to become a lawyer after going to Austin College. But this was in the height of the Vietnam War, and I actually was on a special program in Washington, D.C., where 100 students from 100 small liberal arts colleges across the country, Pomona, Case Western, Millsaps, those kinds of schools like Austin College, would send one person to D.C., housed at American University, and it was an intensive seminar on American federalism. And so I was fortunate enough to have a one-on-one, not a one-on-one, but a group of about 20 fellow students with Thurgood Marshall of the Supreme
wow.
Court, Mike Mansfield, who was the majority leader at the time. I worked for John Sparkman from Alabama, who was chairman of the Senate Banking and Currency Committee. That was my internship while I was in D.C. And so I ate Senate bean soup every day.
Wow. How long were you there?
It's just one semester, and it was in the fall of 1969.
Oh.
So I participated in the Candlelight March, where 100,000 people marched from the Washington Monument to the White House carrying a candle, and we put our candle on the gates of the White House in protest of the Vietnam War.
Interesting.
But I got to meet Benjamin Spock, and it was a very turbulent time in America, and I was at the heart of it.
Interesting. Yeah, I lived in D.C. For about 4.5 years, and I was there during the bicentennial, so it was a few years after you were there. But 1976, I lived there, and it's such a great place to live and to visit because there's so many things happening all the time. And you get to see, I got to see Helmut Kohl with Gerald Ford, and I went to Jimmy Carter's inauguration, got a peanut in the parade. There's just so many cool things going on there all the time. My daughter actually lives in Washington, D.C. right now, and so we go there and visit her somewhat regularly.
Well, being a political science major, I remember we went to New York, to Queens, the Queensboro in New York, and campaigned for John Lindsay for mayor.
Interesting. Well, very good. We're going to take a quick break. We will be right back after this. We are back talking to Jeff Harkinson of Harkinson Investment Corporation. And by the way, I failed to mention at the beginning that you can find him online at harkcorp.com. That's HARKCORP.com. Learn more about what they're all about. So before the break, we were talking about your time in Washington, D.C., and this was the height of the Vietnam War. So you got to go through this sort of intensive seminar while you were still a student at Austin College, or was this after you graduated?
I was still a student at Austin College, just kind of their representative, if you will, for the program. And so what happened was that was the year, you may recall, where they initiated the draft.
Yes.
So it went by your birthday. And 365 or 366 days in the year. So they picked my birthday as the number 12, which meant I was red meat, ready to go.
No kidding.
So I didn't bother applying to law school because I didn't want to waste the application fee since I was going to Vietnam. But I went in for a physical and 1A, which meant I was prime, ready to go. And then I went to my doctor, and he wrote a letter to the draft board about my asthma, and they don't want you to have asthma when you're fighting in the jungle. So at the 11th hour, I got a medical deferment. Well, it was too late to apply to law school, but SMU was at that time starting up a graduate program in public administration. And so the head of the program came to Austin College and met with me and my political science professor and offered me a full scholarship to get a master's in public administration.
Now, why would they offer a full scholarship for that?
Well, I think they were just trying to recruit students, and they thought I was good material and came after me.
So it was a new program, and they needed students to fill it, and because of your service in D.C., I imagine that probably made a big difference.
Well, I think my academic record and a number of factors were at play there. So anyway, I got a master's degree at SMU, and then I was still going to go back to law school. My wife was a school teacher, but while I was getting my master's degree, I had an internship with the city manager's office at the city of Dallas. And after that, I was offered the job of assistant to the city manager in the city of Mesquite, and it paid the princely sum with a master's degree of $621 a month. And my wife was a school teacher. She started off at Aldridge Elementary in Plano and then taught second grade at the Lamplighter School on Inward Road in Dallas.
Okay.
And so between her $600 a month and my $600 a month, we eked out
You're living
a
large.
living. Yeah.
Wow. That
We,
seems like such a paltry amount now.
We went to the grocery store one week, and we had $7 that week for groceries. So we got to the checkout stand. We were about $9, so we had to put a few items back for the week.
I've been there. When we lived in Austin, we were so poor. We actually collected all of our old books and even the school books and took them over to half-price books to see what we could get. And we didn't have any great plans with this money. We just wanted a little entertainment money. We wanted to go to the movies and out to dinner. So we sold all these books. And I think we got $5 for all these books that we spent hundreds and hundreds of dollars to buy, of course. And so we got $5 so we could go to the dollar movie together and not even buy dinner.
I've been there, done that. Not necessarily the books, but
oh my gosh, it's crazy. When I was in college, I tried to sell my blood. I was so disappointed. I had the most common blood there is, so they didn't want to pay me anything hardly. So that didn't do me any good either.
So one interesting thing about my background, Bob, is that I've worked all my life. Like my first job was I would collect pop bottles from construction sites in Houston, Texas, and I could turn them in for 2 cents a piece.
Yep.
So I had always loved horses, liked to ride horses, and so I kept asking my parents, would they give me a horse for Christmas? And my mother kept putting me off, saying, well, on your 10th birthday, we'll get you a horse, thinking I'd forget about it. I said, Mom, it's only one more year before I get my horse.
Oh, no.
So they bought me a horse for $75, but we couldn't afford a saddle. So I worked on the pop bottles and saved up $25 and bought my saddle.
That's a lot of pop bottles.
That's a lot of pop at 2 cents a piece.
That is awesome. And so how long did you keep that horse?
Well, until junior high, and I got more interested in girls than horses at that point.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. That's funny. Yeah, my grandparents told us they were going to buy us a horse. We lived in Germany. My dad was in the military, so we lived in Germany for a few years when I was pretty young. And they told us they were going to buy us a horse, each of us a horse, my brother, my sister, and myself. We were all excited when we came back to the U.S., and unfortunately they couldn't afford 3 horses by the time we got back. And we lived on an army post, so we certainly couldn't keep this horse. So they bought us 1 horse, and I think we got to ride it 1 time. And that was the end of the horse. It was gone. Never had another one.
Well, they had show and tell. I was in 5th grade, and so I brought my horse to school for show and tell.
That's awesome. My wife grew up on some acreage, not a lot of acreage, but like 10 acres, and her dad got her a pony one of the times, and it was like a herding pony, and he ran cattle in the back. And so she'd go out there and ride her little pony, and it was out there herding up all the cattle, running them. And her dad came out yelling and screaming, "Stop, stop, stop. You're running the fat off my cattle. You're costing me money." That was funny to me. Well, so you got these degrees, and you started doing work in the public sector, working for
right. So
cities and
I
such.
spent 10 years in the public sector. I had the internship at the city of Dallas. Then I spent 2 years with the city of Mesquite, and then I was recruited to join the staff of the North Central Texas Council of Governments based in Arlington. It's the area-wide planning agency for Dallas-Fort Worth. It's the agency that led to the creation of DFW Airport and DART as a regional police academy. A fantastic organization if your listeners are not familiar with it. And I spent 8 years there as kind of the third in line executive administrator. And then what happened was the city manager of Hearst, who was A.J. Brown, he's a former police chief of Fort Worth and had become city manager of Hearst. I read where he was resigning to join a development company based in Hearst. So I took A.J. to lunch, inquiring about applying for the job of city manager. And during the lunch, he found out that while I was at the Council of Governments, I'd gotten a broker's license through coursework at the University of Texas at Arlington. And he said, well, I've got a better offer for you. He said, why don't you come join our development company. We just lost our broker, who was Stephen Kozlik, who is now with Woodmont Development.
Yeah.
And I said, AJ, I have a broker's license, but I don't know the lingo. And he said, Jeff, you got a good head on your shoulders. You can learn the lingo. And anyway, he talked me into coming to work. Well, I went from a low public servant salary, but with nice health benefits and a nice retirement plan, to straight commission with no health benefits and no retirement plan.
No kidding.
And it was when my wife was pregnant with our third child, and it was in the middle of the recession of 81, 82. Being in the public sector, I wasn't as attuned to recessions as we are in the private sector.
Yeah, nothing's immune from recessions like government.
And so...
but wait, why did you get your broker's license in the first place?
Well, I think it was some encouragement from my wife. We've been married now, in December will be 48 years.
Congrats.
We met at Austin College, and, it was just a great marriage. It's probably the best decision I've made in my entire life.
That's an important one.
I think it's the most important in terms of who you choose as your mate.
Absolutely. And just as a little side note, the single biggest determinant of poverty in America, I understand, is divorce.
Yes.
A little side note, but anyway.
Well, what was interesting, so my wife had offered to continue to work to let me go to law school, and I said, no, I'm not going to do that. But you know about the real estate depression of 1986.
Oh, yeah.
So I knew a lot of men whose wife divorced them when the money ran out.
Mm-hmm.
And my wife said, hey, we were poor as church mice when we got married. If we're poor again, it doesn't really matter. And so that is a great support. When you're down and out, you need that kind of partner support that can kind of pull you through hard times.
Absolutely. I had a really tough time at one time, and my wife was actually pawning stuff and not telling me. I mean, I was so humiliated when I found out about that, but at the same time, I was amazed at her willingness to sacrifice to get us through. So it's pretty amazing to have those kinds of spouses.
It's very important. And so what I found out that AJ and I discovered is that the gentleman we went to work for was a born-again Christian. And he'd have a Bible reading on Monday morning, and then by Monday afternoon, he'd be screwing people.
Oh.
And then he'd have
screwing
a Bible...
people meaning cheating them.
Cheating
not,
them,
okay.
Yes, not...
Okay. Just want to make sure we're defining our terms.
And so then he'd have a Bible reading the following Monday to atone for the sins of the previous week. And he once told me, Jeff, isn't it wonderful that we have a forgiving God? So AJ quit because he was going to head up development in the recession of 82. There was no development going on. I was chained at the hip because the gentleman had been loaning money against future commissions, so I owed him maybe $13,000 at the time. And I couldn't leave because I had to get that debt paid off. And my first deal that allowed me to pay the born-again off was I convinced a partnership of 50 doctors to sell their medical office building in Arlington, Texas. Got it passed by one vote.
Wow.
Got a commission, paid off the debt, and went on my own. And that was in 1983.
So you went on your own in 83, and how long had you been with that company at that point?
About 2 years.
So you have 2 years of experience, and you're like, I'm going to go do this myself.
So one of the most interesting stories is that...
Let's save that story for after the break. Sorry about that.
Okay.
We'll be right back after this.
Did you know DFW is home to a leading nationwide seed accelerator? Code Launch is an annual competition of startup software ideas produced by Frisco-based Code Authority. Attention, all technology startups in Texas, across the USA and around the globe. Apply through May 31st for your chance to win a professional hackathon team, win thousands of dollars in seed services, and pitch on our stage with your new code in hand. Apply now through May 31st at codelaunch.com.
Welcome back. We're talking to Jeff Harkinson on the Next Level Show. So, Jeff, you were starting to tell us the story before I rudely cut you off.
Well, that's all right. So it's kind of an interesting story because here I am, I've got 2 years of real estate experience, 10 years of public management experience. And so what am I going to do? I'm on my own. So I went back to my mentor, George Schrader.
Oh, yeah. I remember that name.
When I worked for the city of Dallas, George was assistant city manager, but he later became city manager, one of the best city managers Dallas has had in its history. And I said, George, you know a lot of people. I said, can you introduce me to some of the banks, because I'd like to see if they have any real estate that I could sell for them. So he introduced me to Brooks Wimberly, who was the head of the real estate facilities for InterFirst Bank, at that time one of the largest banks in Dallas.
Mm-hmm.
And Brooks said, well, Jeff, we have this building called the Insurance Plaza building here in downtown Dallas, and the best thing I can say about it, it's got a 900-car parking garage. He said, I can't give you an exclusive listing, but if you sell it, I'll pay you a 3% commission. I said, great, let me go to work. This was in October. I just left the Born Again in October.
Oh, wow. So your first listing is a giant building in downtown.
Giant building, and it's an open listing. It's not an exclusive.
Yeah, which is risky because you spend a lot of time
Spend
on
a
your
lot
money.
of time, and
We speculate our time as brokers, and you hope that something closes and you get paid for it at the end of the day. So that's why most of the time brokers insist on an exclusive listing so that they know they have some shot at getting paid at the end of the day, and somebody else is not going to swoop in and steal it from them. But in your case, you take an open listing, which means there are other people that could come in and broker that deal with a different buyer, and you have nothing.
So I start to work, and I find a buyer for the building, and he did creative structuring of the deal. What he did is the building was empty, so there's no revenue. He structured where the bank would do a 3-year lease back on the building. He paid them more money for the building to offset the cost of the leaseback, but it enabled him to get financing on the building. And so in December of 1983, 3 months after I go on my own, I sell a $32 million office building.
Oh, my goodness.
The buyer takes half the fee, but that still leaves me with $460,000.
So in 1983, you make a $460,000 commission. Your wife must have thought you were the smartest guy that ever walked the face of the earth.
Paid a lot of overhead.
Well, yeah. So what?
and helped get me out of debt. So, yes, that was a nice beginning. And 32 is my lucky number because later I sold the 90 acres across from the old Texas Stadium. It was owned by a British company, and we sold it to a Belgian company.
I worked for that Belgian company.
You worked for Hubert Flamont?
I did.
I didn't know that about you.
I know. I didn't realize you sold that property. So we're both learning something here.
Hubert bought it for $32 million.
How funny. Texas Plaza, he called it.
Yes, it was called Texas Plaza.
How funny. Yeah, I worked for them when I was still in college at UTA. I went to work for them my last 2 years in college, and then I stayed with them after college.
We've known each other all these years, and this is the first time we've discovered this.
How funny. Well, we'll have to talk more about this maybe at lunch later. But so you make this big sale. How do you translate that into a business going forward? Obviously, you had cash, but what did you do next?
Well, so I was never really a flamboyant person. A lot of people had good years, and they'd buy fancy cars and all that. The only thing I did that was kind of stepping out was I bought a new house, and I kept my other house as a rental property. But what happened was, as you know, that was in 1983. Well, we went into a real estate depression 3 years later in 1986, and I had some good years from 83 until the beginning of 86. I sold some buildings in Phoenix, Arizona, to the trust real estate department of the banks, who were investing on behalf of wealthy clients, and sold some other things. And so I made a pretty good living and accumulated some assets during those years. But when the real estate depression came in August of 1986, there were no buyers. Oil was $10 a barrel. cost of producing cattle was below the cost of, the price for beef was below the cost of production. All the banks went bankrupt. The insurance companies were having trouble. So all the real estate developers went bankrupt because Ronald Reagan had eliminated the accelerated depreciation on real estate, called the passive loss rules, without any phase in. And so every real estate deal across the country went belly up because they were all promoted on the tax benefits from accelerated depreciation.
And that even applied to partnerships that were already in place. So it was a
Exactly.
retroactive thing.
Exactly.
So that's really what killed it. If they'd have done it from then on for new deals, that'd have been one thing. But to unravel everything that had been done up to that point was insanity.
It's like somebody went up to the faucet and is on full blast and they just turned it off overnight.
Yeah. That just killed so many people.
And it killed me too, because I'm an income property broker, right? All the properties then are underwater, so they all get foreclosed on by the government, either the RTC, the alphabet soup, or the FDIC. And so there are no buyers. So the transition from being I was thinking, well, how am I going to support a family of three? I have 2 mortgage payments, 3 kids in private school. I'm up to my eyeballs in expense with no income.
Yeah.
So I'm burning through the assets I'd accumulated in those good 3 years very rapidly. And I wake up and realize that technically I'm bankrupt even though I haven't declared it. So about that time, I get a call from Chicago Title Company, one of the closers there, and says, Jeff, Lumberman's insurance company has just foreclosed on a property in Addison. Would you like the listing? And I said, well, there are no buyers, but let me see what I can do with it. I'm at a party with a social friend of mine who happens to be a developer, and I tell him about the listing. He says, Jeff, I know that property. He said, that's a great property. He said, why don't we buy it? I said, John, we don't have 2 nickels to rub together. You're a broke developer. I'm a broke broker.
Sounds perfect.
Where are we going to get the money to buy this thing? He says, well, you know some people. I know some people. Let's see if we can raise the equity. Well, the total equity, so I go back to Lumberman's and tell them that I'm the buyer, and at first they kind of, say, oh, I'm not sure, but we cut a deal, and I get them to carry 80% of the purchase price back in a seller finance note. Well, the princely equity amount was $160,000, and we bought 2 buildings, one 14,206 feet and the other 24,524 feet.
Oh my goodness. You buy 36,000
for $160,000 of equity.
Unbelievable.
And we found out that life companies were great people to buy from because they were very litigious conscious. They kept their properties in good condition because they didn't want somebody suing them over a trip and fall.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no deferred maintenance.
And they have tenants in it?
But the problem is that they could never make a decision on a lease because they wanted you to pledge your firstborn to cut a deal with you. Well, when we had it under contract, it was 60% leased when we contracted for it. We had 100% leased by the time we closed because we could make entrepreneurial decisions, quick decisions.
Right.
We didn't ask, for 3 years of tax returns, and we got the thing full. Well, we couldn't live just on one deal.
Yeah.
So we started looking for and buying other one-off deals. And the most interesting deal was Kilgore State Bank in Kilgore, Texas, had foreclosed on 100 units of apartments built on 100 acres of land.
Wow. That's giant.
And after they foreclosed on the property, they had a discovery oil well on this property, and for some reason the bank got the mineral rights when they foreclosed. And so this was during the first Gulf War, and the Texas Railroad Commission that governs oil and gas production in Texas had lifted what they called the allowable, which means you could pump all that you could get out of the ground as fast as you could get it out. Well, the oil was producing $40,000 a month in royalty payments to the bank. So we contract for this thing from the bank, and I go to one of my brokerage clients, a doctor out of Los Angeles who loves apartments, and said, Dr. Singer, we'd like to keep 25% of the mineral rights each, and you can have 50. And we sold this deal and got a $100,000 fee for selling it and kept 25% of the minerals. Well, as soon as we closed, the Railroad Commission put the allowable back on, and the $40,000 a month went to $4,000 a month.
Oh,
But it was still a pretty good deal.
yeah. So you got 100,000, and then you got $1,000 a month,
Right.
which better than not having it.
Hey, in those days, every dollar was important.
So as you built your business, it was just one deal at a time. And I mean, when did you wake up and say, "Hey, I've got a staff and property managers and people running these things"? And
Well, what's interesting, I had my nose to the grindstone so focused that I'd hired one person to help me. I was doing everything. I was doing the property management, the leasing, the acquisitions, the debt financing, picking up trash in the parking lot. I was doing it all.
Sure.
And then finally I hired one person, so my mother actually suggested, Jeff, you hadn't had a vacation in a long time. You need to go on a vacation. I said, Mom, I can't afford to go on a vacation. And then this CFO I hired said, Jeff, I keep the books. You can afford to take a vacation. And that's the first time I realized that I'd kind of gotten my head out of the tank.
So you hired a CFO, but you didn't know.
Well, one person who kind of did some of the accounting. And
So you called him a CFO, but it was some sort of a property accountant that was kind of keeping your books for you.
That's right.
But you didn't realize you could afford to go on vacation. That's pretty funny, actually. Most people are desperate to go on vacation. I'm desperate to go on vacation. I just got back from Europe, so I'm ready to go again. I can never have enough vacation. We're going to have to take another quick break. We'll be right back. Hey, friends, we're back talking to Jeff Harkinson, Harkinson Investment Corporation. Go check them out online at harkcorp.com. That's HARKCORP.com. And one thing that I thought was cool is that, Jeff, you sent me in the pre-interview materials your resume, of course, and you also sent me a list of every deal you've done. And I thought that was pretty cool because you showed me when you closed on the deal, the name of the deal, the address, what kind of property it is, the size of the property, and who you bought it from. And I thought that was a pretty amazing resume that you've kept and sent. And I think it's good that you've done that because, I mean, whenever somebody's selling a property, they want to know what is the ability of that person to actually close on it. And that's pretty incredible. And you have a pretty unique distinction.
I'll give you a very recent example. We just closed last week on a 94,000 square foot shopping center in Coppers Cove, Texas.
Yep, down near Killeen.
And I was at the International Council of Shopping Centers meeting in Fort Worth. They had a regional meeting in February. And so I meet with the seller, a group called Endeavor out of Austin, Texas.
Sure.
And they had just been to the altar and got stood up. The deal fell out of escrow and is back on the market. And the broker told me if they can't get it closed by or sold by end of January, then they want to keep it and just put debt on it. So I met with them. They had two other buyers that were interested and said, well, Jeff, why should we do this deal with you? I said, well, you've been to the altar once. You know, you got stood up. You know, I don't think you want to get stood up again. So I said, I have a perfect closing record. I've never contracted for a property in my career that I didn't close.
And furthermore, what about loans?
Well, and I have great debt sources. So,
and you've never applied for a loan that you haven't actually gone through with either.
That's right. I've never applied for a loan that I didn't close. So
that's huge.
You know, and over what, 28 years or 38 years. I guess that's pretty good.
I mean, whenever I'm representing a seller, we look at that kind of thing. We ask people about that kind of thing because ultimately the worst thing you have is kind of like the Endeavor guys. You never want a property that you've put under contract that comes back to the market because most of the time it doesn't seem like you get as good a deal the second time around. People know about that somehow and assume that it's not going to be worth as much. It's just harder to sell, it seems, the longer it sits.
So we were able to complete our due diligence in 20 days, including arranging the debt, doing the appraisal, the third-party reports of the property condition assessment and environmental, and close 30 days later.
That's amazing. And
that was like a $12,600,000 acquisition.
Now you have around 3 million square feet of property now?
At the height of my acquisition, we had 3 million, but
Okay.
you
Sold a little since?
Richard Rainwater, who was known for advising the Basses that they ought to acquire the Walt Disney Company, once told me, he said, Jeff, it only takes one or two really good decisions to make up for a whole lot of bad decisions. So the best decision in my lifetime was starting to acquire property after the real estate depression of '86, where everything was deeply discounted. The second best decision I made was selling half my portfolio before the Great Recession hit in 2007 and 8.
Mm-hmm.
And that came about because I was at a C.B. Richard Ellis seminar when one of the speakers said, ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you that we're in a new paradigm and that prices are going to stay high for an extended period of time. And I went home that night and woke up in the middle of the night and said, last time I heard we were in a new paradigm was before the market crashed in '86.
Mm-hmm.
So I packaged everything up that was never going to be better than it was or was challenged and was going to stay challenged, and sold a $90 million package of properties before the market crashed.
Good for you. I hope your investors were duly thankful.
Well, they are, and that's why I was able to raise on this Copper's Cove deal. I was able to raise $4.3 million in less than a week.
Wow. You just call your friends and people that have invested with you and just say, I got
another deal, and they count me in.
They don't even evaluate it at that point. You've done this for them so many times.
Well, one of my best friends, who's now deceased and was one of my most loyal investors in the early years, I had the shopping center in Plano, and I had a pool table in my house, and we were shooting pool, and I laid a map on the table and said, where's your eye focus? And he says, right here. I said, well, that's our next deal. And he said, well, count me in for $200,000. I said, well, Tom, don't you want to even read the package? He said, Jeff, you don't get it. He said, I'm not investing in your deals. I'm investing in you.
Exactly. That makes a lot of sense. And, my son is in a technology startup company. And so I've been learning a lot about how angel investors and venture capitalists invest in operating companies like that, early stage. And that's one of the things they say. There's this podcast called the Angel List podcast where they interview all these investors and how they make these decisions. And so if somebody's started a company and it's failed, that is in no way an indication that they're not going to get their next deal, because they've now learned what it's like to fail, and that's going to make them all the better the next time around. Now, in a real estate investment, that's not necessarily the case. People don't see it that way. But when you're looking at angel and VCs, they do. And so they're betting on the person. The idea, that's not as big a deal. They don't care about that as much, but they care about the person, and that's who they're betting on. So that's interesting that you're saying the same thing in your case.
Well, one of my favorite expressions is that if you follow the herd, they'll lead you over a cliff. But the other one is that you have to give yourself permission to make mistakes. Just don't give yourself permission to repeat mistakes, because there's enough new ones you're going to make.
Exactly.
But you can't afford to repeat any.
So how do you structure a deal? So I'm sure people are wondering, how do you structure a deal? I mean, you don't have all your own money in the deal. So
I have a formula that I've stayed with since 1991, and that is that we give the investor, the one putting up the hard cash money, what we call a cumulative preferred return on their equity.
Yep.
Meaning that if the property can't meet the return one year, you have to make it up the next year. And it's structured so that the investor's interest is put first. And that's rare in a deal. We don't take any front-end promote. We do get a back-end interest, where if the deal's successful, we split the profit 70% to the equity and 30% to us as the sponsor. But
So
that only comes if the investor has gotten all their cumulative preferred return and all their money back.
Yeah. And then during that period, so that's how you structure the deal. So you're the general partner, you find the deal, you get the money from these people. These people are limited partners, so their risk is limited.
Their liability is limited only
to
to
the amount
the
of their
check that
investment.
they write for the investment.
Whereas you as a general partner, you would have greater liability depending on how the loan's structured, whether or not there's a personal guarantee or not.
Well, that's the other thing is that, I've learned the hard way from the early years that you don't sign personal liability. So if the deal can't support what we call non-recourse debt, meaning that it's secured by the property only and not by a personal guarantee from me,
Right.
then I don't do the deal.
Which just means you have to have more equity in the deal.
So you have to have more equity, and most of our deals have anywhere from 35% to 25%
okay.
hard equity, and the rest is debt.
Yeah.
And we try to structure our debt where we have what I call, term debt, where usually it's at least a 10-year loan. So, but on some of the properties that I've described to you as legacy properties, we'll put those on a self-amortizing loan, meaning that the debt pays off and then you own it debt-free, because from past recessions I've learned that you don't want to have a loan maturity event in the middle of a recession because you can't refinance the property.
Yeah, and that's the thing that a lot of people don't understand is if you do a loan, it may have a 20 or 25-year amortization, meaning your payments are based on as if it had that length of term, but it actually has a 5 or 10-year call. So it does expire, and you then have this giant amount that has to be either paid off, or you sell the property, or you refinance it. So
the Copper's Cove deal, for example, we put that on a 20-year self-amortizing loan, and we were fortunate to get a 4.6% fixed rate.
Wow.
75% loan to value.
That's good.
So one of the things that happens with a track record is that not only is your equity loyal, if you think about my first deal was $160,000 of equity. The most recent deal we did was $4.3 million of equity, and it's much harder for me to get the 160 than it was for the 4.3.
I bet.
But the same thing with lenders. We have a cadre of lenders now who know us, who like doing business with us because we underwrite the deal conservatively, and they feel like they have a safe loan when they lend to us.
Yeah.
Even though it's a non-recourse loan, they know they'll be paid.
So how is the company structured? I mean, you talked about hiring the accountant way back. What is the number of people in the company look like now, and what kind of functions are they
We're still
performing?
a small staff. We have maybe 10 people.
Okay.
So we have 2 property managers. We have a receptionist who serves multiple functions. I have a CFO. My daughter and son-in-law are in the company, and they're both leasing agents, and my son-in-law is a CPA, so he's upped our financial analysis game considerably since he came on board 5 years ago.
Has that allowed you to make better decisions, or just do a lot more
Well, I'm
analysis?
a back-of-the-envelope kind of guy.
I was going to say.
He and I get to the same place, but he has much better methodology than I.
His looks better to the bankers?
Exactly.
Well, and I've met Samantha, your daughter, and Troy, your son-in-law, and they do a good job of leasing. So that's who I call whenever I need to show one of your buildings to one of my clients.
Well, my daughter attended Rhode Island School of Design and graduated from SMU, but she does all of our remodels. She's really got an eye for design. So
Okay.
we've remodeled our office building in Addison. We're about to remodel another office building we have in Addison. And so she's a valued member of the team and wears a lot of hats, as we all do in a small company.
And what is your, what does the company look like 3, 5, 10 years from now?
Well, that's going to be primarily up to Samantha and Troy. They want to take it to another level. They have their own priorities, and they may be the same as mine, or they may be different.
Well, Jeff, we're going to have to stop it there. Thank you so much for being the guest on the show today. Listeners, please go to harkcorp.com to learn more about Harkinson Investment Company. Check out the show at thenextlevelshow.com. You can find us on podcast or on YouTube. Again, just search The Next Level Show and you'll find us. We'll be back next week with another great guest. Bye.